Looks like we're reaching the home stretch. All right, this is my poster project to help conclude the course and look back at some of the ideas we've explored throughout the course. Um, I'm using a Prezi to present my poster, along with adding my own narration using screencast-o-matic.com, which I must say is one of the better tools that I've been introduced to. Without further ado, let's get started and work through my Prezi so that I can explain all of my ideas. Philosophy. Starting off my philosophy on online learning. Um, I expressed early on in the course that I think that it would be wise to utilize online learning in the ways which would uh, best suit it. And by that I mean there are simply things that can be done better online than face to face. Online learning obviously removes the need for classroom space, allows for larger groups of people to collaborate, allows for tools like private one-on-one quizzes, IMing, and other sorts of things that a face-to-face instructor would not be able to enjoy. Um, I think that there should not be an over-reliance on those technologies, but that they should be incorporated into existing good teaching approaches and methods. For example, a good teaching strategy is to have a door entrance activity, startup activity. It has a lot of different names. There are ways to do that online so that potentially they're easier and more effective. Maybe a poll, maybe different questions privately messaged to each student. Um, Maybe it's the same question just on every student's screen to make sure that they're responding to it rather than sitting in their seats and perhaps not answering it. Um, the other part of my philosophy, as I expressed in my paper for Module 2, was that much like with the face-to-face classroom, the goal is to equip students with the tools and develop skills they need for successful adult life. So exposure to situations and tools that they will be using in everyday life, for example, typing programs, Excel, web conferences, and all those types of things are just as crucial now as teaching them how to read and speak and things of that sort were and still are to some extent in a brick and mortar classroom. Also, as with anything in teaching, the instructor must model the expected behavior and exploration. So by that I mean the instructor must model or must demonstrate a willingness to explore new technologies for the students in order to hopefully foster that in them as well, and also to encourage them to think outside the box and use technologies in ways that they may not think to use it, since many kids these days use it as a social tool or a game. A brief description of my unit. My unit would be a research paper. This would allow them to learn how to perform research, learn about good sources, discern good sources from bad sources, how to develop citations, which goes under sourcing, which I have as the last bullet point. They would learn planning strategies, perhaps outlining, idea maps, brainstorming, and various other note-taking and planning strategies. They'll learn the writing itself, how to structure an introduction, a thesis statement, a conclusion, body paragraph, supporting arguments. Um, this research paper, to go back a step, would be based on a career that they're interested in exploring. So this would help them take their own agency. Once they write the paper, they would proofread. Then they would go through a revision process to learn about drafting and revisions and to learn how to reflect and analyze their own papers and those of their peers. And as I mentioned, they would be developing reference lists. So this would be another skill that they would learn through the course of this unit, all of which are skills that can and will rely heavily on the use of technology, such as databases online, Google, and other various resources that are used in academia and in life these days. Moving next to integrating tools in my classroom. Synchronous tools that I would be utilizing would be Google Hangouts, and I would use this as a tool to uh, allow for peer review sessions. As I mentioned previously, one of the steps would be revision to their papers, um, to their research papers. They could use Google Hangouts to meet with their partners, their revision partners, and discuss their papers, go over ideas, perhaps early on even help one another, brainstorm with one another about ideas and help each other to outline. Asynchronous tools that could be used would be discussion boards, much like Pro boards that I reviewed, or just the discussion boards in D2L, which could be used to carry out similar functions that I just mentioned, brainstorming, revisions, etc. Audio boards, the Voxapop board that I reviewed, that could be a great thing to use. I think it could simply be used to supplement the discussion boards to help develop some social presence a little better than text-based discussion boards would. And collaboration tools. A Google Doc could be used for two people to develop a list of ideas together or an outline together, or even for proofreading. They could be collaborating at the same time. Perhaps a combination of being on Google Hangouts and using Google Docs to have the document open and to be discussing and editing and proofreading each other's paper in real time would be ways that I would be integrating these tools into my unit. Management and assessment. The textbook provides a lot of good examples of this in Chapter 6, a lot of good suggestions. Again, I think it's important for the instructor to model expected behavior, uh, perhaps, modeling etiquette, response lengths, things of that sort, even if it's not the instructor himself doing it, perhaps providing examples of good responses and expected responses to asynchronous or synchronous or collaboration tool participation. I think it's important, as the text emphasized, for the instructor to probe rather than give answers, to probe the students for their own answers, to keep encouraging them to discuss and to get at the questions that the instructor really wants them to explore. Active monitoring. When I say active monitoring, by that I mean uh, not to simply be hands off and assign due dates to make sure that students are actually adhering to due dates. This could be as simple as providing students notifications that they have yet to complete an assignment or something of that sort, making announcements, sending emails, whatever time allows. Um, Actively monitoring also means to patrolling the forums or web discussions if we're using asynchronous discussions, or even just monitoring synchronous discussions, perhaps being a part of some Google Hangouts that I mentioned earlier. Spacing out due dates as far as assessment goes, um, or management, I think that would be a important thing to do because rather than simply requiring all 5 posts to be done by the end of the week, breaking it up into chunks would allow for it to be a allow for it to be broken up and make sure the discussion is ongoing rather than it just piling up at the end and not really having a fruitful discussion, anything akin to what a face-to-face discussion could possibly provide. I think adherence to this, especially with spacing out due dates, would help with assessment. It would ensure that the instructor has a means of measuring whether or not the students are constantly interacting with the course, their peers, and the material, or if they're just letting it all pile up till the end and getting in responses at the last minute. I think spacing out due dates and chunking the requirements helps to alleviate this issue. Realizations and questions. In one of the modules, one of my classmates commented that always feels like he wants to do too much and he doesn't ever know where to stop as far as incorporating different technologies and tools into his lessons. That really was an aha moment for me because it made me realize that it's always an ongoing process. It can always be an ongoing process when it comes to online distance learning classes. Perhaps in the first version of my class, I only record myself doing audio lectures. Then perhaps by the second, I incorporate Screencast-O-Matic to record myself narrating over a PowerPoint. Then perhaps that can involve incorporating video clips. Perhaps that evolves to a live Google Hangout for a certain lesson. Perhaps that evolves into um, using a Prezi, Blabberize, Voxapop, D2L discussion boards, D2L Blackboard Collaborate. There's so many endless options. And that kind of leads into my next one of adapting and refitting. PowerPoint has been around for a very long time, but it continues to be relevant because even when a new tool like Google Hangouts or Screencast-O-Matic comes along, oftentimes PowerPoint is used as the main meat of the presentation. It's simply screencasted and narrated over. Um, it's adapted. It's a new use has been found for it, and it's been refit to evolving online learning technologies, which I think is very interesting. Um, Questions that have come to mind are: should distance learning fully replace face-to-face classroom learning, and can it? I still think it's a young technology, and we can't really fully decide whether or not face-to-face can fully be replaced by distance learning. Um, I think to some extent we're trying to develop whether we're trying to do that through cyber school and other mediums, but I still think the jury is out on whether or not distance learning can fully supplant face-to-face learning, even though it certainly seems like society is attempting to accomplish that. What will the long-term effects of a generation raised through distance learning or online learning really be? Again, I think the jury's still out. There's research to be done on that about whether or not education has become less effective or if there's any damaging effects to uh, learning online or distance learning. I'm just curious that if anyone's even developing studies to trace this, and if we have a base of comparison against generations who grew up only with face-to-face learning. I brought this question up in a previous module, but is distance learning being embraced too quickly? There are many issues at play. One of them is that instructors are not being given sufficient training for online teaching. Another is that perhaps some subjects simply don't have tools ready yet to best suit them. For example, music classes. Some of my classmates are hardware majors of some sort, be it tech ed or computer engineering or things of that sort, things that require hands-on experience. Um, we don't really have much in terms of distance learning that can really do those subjects justice yet. So I wonder if we're embracing distance learning just a bit too quickly. And maybe we need to reconsider the relationship that we want to have between distance learning and face-to-face learning, at least for now, while we still study the long-term effects and learn what education might look like in a world where we have the option of online learning. I personally foresee a future where the two learn to complement each other rather than competing, but I think that may only be my ideal. I think that on both ends, face-to-face and distance learning are competing to some extent, maybe trying to replace the other. And I think we're in for a ride to see where that takes the future of education. And I am very interested to go along for that ride and perhaps think of these questions and see where we end up in another 20 years. I've had a wonderful time in this course, and I look forward to potentially taking future courses exploring this subject. But for now, this concludes my last module submission. So thank you for your responses and for listening to my contributions.